Welcome everyone to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast, the podcast focused on leadership. The episode will begin shortly. Thank you so much for tuning in. Enjoy the podcast.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Dr. John Bedker Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, John Bedker. Well, I trust everyone had a nice Thanksgiving holiday. I know that we certainly did. A little time off, a little time with family. It's really quite wonderful, and I hope it was for you as well. Well, I'm so glad you have tuned in. We're back at it, and I think it's going to be fun today talking about an exciting topic, the topic of entrepreneurship and innovation. It'll really leadership's role in those, the act of being an innovator, an entrepreneur, really central to the history of the United States and central to the advancement of this country, socially and certainly economically. Let me begin by a quote, and I'll quote throughout this podcast from this article, and I'll make sure to give proper attribution. It's an article by Espen Stokes. He is a psychologist and economist. He's also the author of the book, Tomorrow's Economy. And so many of these quotes will be from that piece. Also want to thank the MIT Press for publishing his work. Okay, here we go. To begin, a quote: "Innovations are often difficult to imagine before they arrive. It isn't until they've diffused into widespread use that they seem natural, ordinary, and commonsensical." Well, there we are. We really do have this sort of status quo quality as human beings, which is to say, we're not keen on change. Change is a little disruptive, a little doubtful, a little concerning, could be a little stressful. But change is everything that this topic today is about: innovation and entrepreneurship. So what happens when people, individuals, leaders say, I have an idea. I think that this could really be something. I really have a passion about it. Wow, that has been one of the really foundational elements of our country. We have long had a history of being a country of innovators. And so today we're going to talk about the role of these people, these leaders, to innovate. Okay, begin with a little bit of history, and then we're going to get to the two areas I really want to focus on. Two companies, same area, but two companies regarding current innovation today. Okay, so let's begin and talk about what this whole history has been about, what Joseph Schumpeter has named creative destruction. So what happens is something has been this way for a long, long time. And then someone comes up with this new idea, a very different idea, an innovative idea. Well, that's creative for sure, but it's also disruptive to the status quo. Quick history here, and then we'll get right to it. There have been really 5 main waves of innovation since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. I'm not going to spend a big amount of time, but I think it's just sort of important to set the context, set the history here, because we can glean a lot from these waves and help us better understand what's unfolding around us today. I'll talk about quickly just 5 waves, and then we'll get to what is happening today, which I will describe as wave number 6. Okay, the first wave, mechanization. Okay, most people are familiar with that. Somewhere around 1760 to 1830. What happened was we went to mechanize things, all right? Before their coal mines and all these kinds of machines are created, spinning jennies, if you can remember that from your history, all sorts of mechanical wonders, the steam engine. Okay, and so a really huge change and innovation early on in American life. Wave 2, what's described as steel, steam, and railways, that from basically 1830 to 1900. And there we begin to see that innovation breeds more innovation. For instance, in the case of ore, iron ore, well, the idea was to create a railroad, a national railroad, an intercontinental railroad. But the iron ore was too soft. It was too malleable. You couldn't function with the weight of a rail car and these longer trains. So what happened? Another innovation occurred in that, as we well know now from history, was the creation of steel from ore. Steel was huge. The production of steel, huge, really was an innovative change of significant proportions in the United States. Changed all kinds of things, connected people from all different areas of the country. A real transformational innovation. All right, so what happened? Well, you had families that then accumulated great wealth. Certainly in this period of time, we think about the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies. They became incredibly wealthy people. They had oversized power and influence, which often happens in these periods of innovation. Okay, the third wave, industry, going somewhere from 1900 to say 1970. And here we see this real sense of change to an industrial base. Okay? Now, think about this as a story, just sort of quick sidebar. I live near Washington, D.C. So the person of means and wealth rides into town on his horse-drawn carriage. He's coming to see the carriage manufacturer, potentially to buy a new carriage. But next to that is the shop for the whip maker, the breeders, the saddle makers, the blacksmiths. These are all customary and usual businesses on a main street. And then you say, what would happen if industry took over and we had an electric vehicle, a motorized vehicle? The problem wasn't that it could be done. They had actually advanced engineering to a point where they knew that it could, but it's the idea of doing it, of having a motorized car. Well, then wave 4 comes, and here we talk about electronics, television, aviation, all kinds of innovations that were spawned from this new creation, the transistor, which is really a basis of the semiconductor and all electronics. So it came from these really humble beginnings, vacuum tubes, but they kept making them better and better and better, which spawned all sorts of new businesses and industries. Well, by the 80s, this company, IBM, had become this huge, valuable company. It was worth 3 times as much as the second most, which was Exxon, the oil company. All right. So this develops. And what happens is we then go into what is called wave 5, which is where we are presently, the digital and internet wave. Now, it's interesting. to state, and I think this is important. I'll quote from the article here again. Given the many ways our lives are defined by the internet today, it's difficult to believe that the World Wide Web only got going during the late 1990s. Holy cow. Think about that. We feel like it's been here, maybe not forever, but for a good while. Well, it hasn't. It's relatively new. Well, so what happens? What happens is in these waves, which go somewhere from 40 to 70 years, there are all kinds of companies that grow and advance that really become behemoths in industry and in our economy. Certainly now in the present wave, the 5 largest companies, or 6, let's say, by market capitalization. Big companies. NVIDIA, hadn't even heard of that way back when. An Apple, a Google, a Microsoft, an Amazon, or what used to be known as Facebook, now called Meta. So these companies that really were about fossil fuels, industrial age, and oil and gas are now being eclipsed by these other types of companies, digital companies. Which brings us to today and what I really want to get to, and that's what I'm calling Wave 6. Really a green wave. 2015 or so, probably go on to at least 2060. Well, what happened? Well, we went through these phases, right? We're familiar with. I talked about this sort of side story about the horse-drawn carriage and the builders of it. And then we went to the sort of punch card manufacturers in the 70s and the mainframe computer companies of the 80s. Then we sort of touched very lightly on that CD music industry of the 90s, just before the advent of online music, or Kodak. There's a name we haven't heard in a long time. Before this really ubiquitous digital photography began in the 2000s. But here we are today in an age that is going to be begun, at least, by batteries. Now, one thing to keep in mind is oftentimes these new things are very expensive, and then very quickly the prices for these innovations drop. That's an important thing to understand. Here we go. Battery prices have in fact fallen 88% over the last decade. So whether it's solar, energy, power, whatever, the prices of the batteries have gone down significantly. Well, then what happens? Well, there are some things that are sort of common denominators, regular occurrences, either fortunately or unfortunately, in these waves of innovation. There's an author, Carlotta Perez, also part of this MIT Press project I'm reading from. He distinguishes these 5 phases of each of the waves that I've only very, very briefly touched on. These phases are eruption, frenzy, turning point, synergy, and maturity. So we're in one of those now. This eruption phase, when the intense funding for a new technology combined with the disdain of the older assets. So in this frenzy phase, there's a split between what it's really worth, that real value, and then what we say it's worth on paper, right? One can see these sort of inflated expectations. Well, what happens? Well, we only have to think about the dot-com bubble of 2000, when startups had these incredible valuations, but it didn't last. The frenzy stage usually results in some sort of financial bubble, followed by a crash. And then after the bust, this new golden age, this new innovation age gets going again. And then there is more what I'll describe as coherent growth in their production, employment, share value. All these things sort of reach an alignment, and that's a good thing. But the old thing does in fact likely fail. For instance, now with this battery, we will likely see a fall of oil and gas. Companies that were worth so much may not be worth so much going forward. A quote from this article that I'm referring to: "What will soon become abundantly clear is that there's a limited time left for profitably exploring, producing, and selling oil and gas. The fossil fuel age may be approaching an end, and this new age of batteries may have a very keen place." Okay, and so let's give two examples, quick examples, of people that are doing this innovative work, that are being absolutely entrepreneurial and are seeing this dream of batteries to change the world put into practice. We're going to talk about quickly Joby Aviation, just like it sounds, Joby, Joby Aviation. And then we're also going to talk about Archer Aviation. Now, obviously you hear aviation in both companies' names because that is what this really is about. Aviation, not in the sense that you and I know it, not in the way we understand it, but in this very new and innovative way, which is to say, electric. We've heard about this a little bit with cars, but now we're going to revolutionize air travel in what we would call now this new name, urban air mobility. So if you wanted to go from an airport, a busy airport, Chicago O'Hare, JFK in New York, but it could be so many other things in so many other places. Rather than getting into that traffic after you get to the parking lot or go through all the rigmarole, you wouldn't do that. You would hop on an electric vertical takeoff and landing vehicle. Now that's a whole bunch of words. They typically call them eVTOL, electric vertical takeoff and landing. There will be a number of people that enter this space competing for the future to be the innovator where that wealth concentration, the economics truly work. But right now, these are the two leaders. Let's talk about them, each one for just a moment. Joby Aviation, which I mentioned, is a United States venture-backed aviation company developing this, again, electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. It's really meant to be an air taxi. Started in Santa Cruz, California, offices in San Carlos. It has incredible market valuation, just as we described previously. Its founder, Joby Bevert, also from Santa Cruz. Okay, so what have they done? What has Joby done? Well, they've done an awful lot. And I'll just read quickly from two of their press releases currently. One on November 4th about their partnering with Toyota and completing the first air taxi flight in Japan. So it took place at Toyota's facility in Japan. It's the first international exhibition flight. It follows an announcement that Toyota is going to invest another $500 million to support the certification in commercial production of these Joby eVTOL aircraft. So that's, wow, pretty incredible. And the most recent press release they have out is actually on November 12th from Santa Cruz, saying that the construction has begun on the first vertiport in its planned Dubai air taxi network. So a couple things. One, these things are not only just absolutely for real and have absolute incredible funding, but they really are becoming operational. So this vertiport, as it's being called, is situated at the Dubai International Airport, and it's being constructed by Joby Partners, which are some companies in Dubai, and Skyports, who celebrated the moment at a ceremony in the airport in Dubai. It's identifier DXB, that's the Dubai International Airport. It describes the different locations, the different modalities of how this eVTOL, this electric vertical takeoff and landing operation, will work from main transportation hubs, from airports, from marinas, from city centers, and how it'll all be interconnected. Really, really quite interesting how these plans are in fact advancing, and the timeline to operationalize is only a few years away. Okay, so there's a little bit about the involvement of Joby with Toyota, the country of Dubai. It's incredible work out in California, its rich funding sources, and its advancement with its product to a marketplace in certainly the near term. All right, so let's talk about Archer Aviation. Another U.S.-based company. Was started by two founders, Brett Adcock and Adam Goldstein. It's similar. Both these aircraft are piloted. Both of these aircraft, for both Joby and Archer, I'm talking about now, 4 seats. You go short ranges. You know, the idea would be to get to JFK to downtown Manhattan, to get from Chicago O'Hare to downtown Chicago, to get from Dubai Airport to the marina, for instance, in Dubai. Lots of different places, lots of different ways, but typically short haul, typically high speed. What do we know? Incredibly quiet. Obviously, no fossil fuels, clean as can be. No engine, much lower maintenance, better reliability. The quick recharge, if you will, on these batteries is well established. Typically have a number of engines with backups. They've gone through FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, certification processes for production and for air taxi. They are certified to be run commercially, and so they are becoming viable. What we're seeing is long, long lines of traffic, of road traffic, are going to perhaps become less because more and more people will use these air mobility services. And the one I'm talking about here today, the eVTOL, the electric vertical takeoff and landing. Now, Archer Aviation has, their plane, by the way, is called the Midnight. And again, piloted 4-passenger. And it has entered now into flight testing in the second quarter of 2023 and predicts that by the year 2025, it may in fact be able to begin carrying passengers. So its production aircraft is already started to be produced in large numbers. And again, its partners are several. United Airlines, as an example. proposing in that Chicago example I gave, but other places as well, to invest up to $1.5 billion to take passengers from their arrival at an airport to their near-home destination. Incredible innovation. The people that are leading these ideas, seeing them to production, to certification, to financing, to marketing, to really understanding all of the many, many, many questions that come about in new innovation is really a huge, huge idea that leadership plays a key role. Things like judgment, decision-making, when, where, how, all kinds of critical leadership questions need to be answered, addressed, thought through from beginning to end. And these two companies, I've only briefly touched on, are doing just that. So it's a hugely exciting time. The idea of changing again our mode of transportation, as we began this with the horse and the carriage, to then having an automobile, to potentially an electric automobile, to now saying we don't even need the car. We will do vertical takeoff and landing from places near our home to where we want to go. Short distances, short flights, but without the traffic, without the mess, highly reliable, hugely quiet, no fossil fuel. This is the beginning of a huge innovation. All right, folks, there we are. The leadership role that innovators and entrepreneurs are playing today to advance our country and hopefully to help our planet. Thanks so much. We'll talk soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Dr. John Bedker's Leadership Podcast. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please tell your friends, and of course, please follow our podcast and subscribe. Thank you again for tuning in.